So just as people are coming into the room, I'll just say we're expecting over 400 people today. So there's a lot of interest. So if you just bear with us, we're just letting everybody into the room. This will be run as a webinar today, which means that the panelists will be able to speak, but you won't be able to speak directly to us. So I'll just explain that when we have everybody in. Just takes a lot of time to let 400 people into even a virtual room. Okay, just as people are filling into the room, my name is Colleen Savage. I work in EMCO and I'm going to be emceeing today. We have an hour, but we're hoping we might run over if there's a little bit of time at the end to ask extra questions. What we wanted to do today was introduce the new Creative Climate Fund that is available. We are going to open up with Tanya Bonotti, who's the Director of Creative Ireland, who's going to explain a little bit of the context of how the fund came about, what the purpose of the fund is, a little bit of the context there. And then we'll be handing on to representatives from the Department of Environment and Communications and Climate, who will explain the actual fund itself and its dynamics. We're very lucky to be joined today by Dr. Ben Twist from Carbon Trust Scotland, and also by Alison Ticknell from Julie's Bicycle, who's going to explain a little bit about other examples of creative projects around the UK. And we're going to explain a little bit about current attitudes to climate change in Ireland from Dr. Simon O'Rafferty, who's also from EMCO. So I'll have to explain this again as we have everybody in the room. So Richie, how are we doing there? Great, okay, so there's still a few more people to come in.
Yeah, we've 225 at the moment and it's growing every second.
Okay. Just as people are filing into the room, I will say this again, but if you look on the screen, for those of you who are in the room, there's a Q&A function at the bottom there. And that's where we'd like you, as people are speaking, we'd like you to, if you have any questions, to please put the questions into the box, in the Q&A box. If there is a question that you want to address specifically to one of the speakers, if you could just mention that speaker's name at the start of your question and just what your question is. Myself and my colleagues, we were going to look at those questions, group them together and direct as many of them as possible to the people who are here today. If there's anything outstanding, we will come back to you with responses after this session. Okay, so we might just kick off, and as people join us, they can join in. So first of all, I'm delighted that we have such great attendance today. I'm going to hand straight over to Tanya Bonotti, who's the Director of Creative Ireland, to explain the context of the programme.
Thank you very much, everybody. Delighted that so many of you are interested and able to join us today. I'm going to give a quick whistle-stop tour through some of the context here. So I think I have control of the screen. And of course, now I don't. I might ask you to move the slide along in that case, Marion, because I'm having some difficulties all of a sudden. So a bit of the background. This is an initiative of the Creative Ireland programme in conjunction with the Department of Environment. Next slide. The context was that back in 2019, for those of you who don't know, we're an all-of-government programme that looks at how creativity can impact on every government department. And the Department of Climate and the Environment approached us because they were setting up what was known as the CAROs. To those of you from the creative sector who may not be aware of the acronym, it's the Climate Action Regional Offices. So they were being set up around local authorities, and we in Creative Ireland have a culture and creativity team in every local authority. So the idea was to look at projects that had taken place using culture, heritage, creativity on the theme of climate action. One of the things we did, because it didn't exist before, was actually gather a list of projects. We literally couldn't find anywhere or anyone in Ireland who had gathered them together. So those of you who have gone to the application section of the website will see that we have listed some of those projects there. By no means exhaustive, but it is very interesting from our point of view to see what has been done. Last year, the Programme for Government really kick-started that work. You can see that there's a quote from the Programme for Government there, which commits to doing this work. So in November 2020, following on from the report, we held a workshop with about 120 people from the broad, either creative side. They were roughly split 50-50 between the creative end of things, the arts, culture, heritage, and broader creative sectors, and the climate action, be they NGOs or government officials. If you're considering applying for the fund, I'd strongly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. There's a playlist, and all the videos from that workshop are there. Next slide. So one of the learnings from both the report and the workshop, and I guess they have fed into how we think about this fund, was the need for brokers to bridge the gaps. That the projects that seemed to work well were ones that understood, A, that those projects take time, and B, there might be a need for somebody to broker the conversations between the climate scientists, the creative group, and the actual public engagement. There has been some concerns about instrumentalization, in the sense that we know that artists and creative people bring something brilliant to this. And those of you who will have watched the video of our Minister Catherine Martin, she said, if climate change is essentially all about culture change, then who better than the cultural sector to drive that change? But there are some concerns, and we do wish to acknowledge them, where some artists might say, well, this is art for art's sake. I'm not about hooking my wagon to the broader demands of different government departments around public engagement, in which case perhaps this is not for you. The importance of local knowledge, local ambassadors, community-led messaging really shone through for us. And, you know, just that it takes a lot of time to set these things up. And I guess finally, the real need, the collaboration is where it really begins to sing. And the local authorities have been hugely important in all this work. When we looked at the projects that had taken place, loads of them were funded through local authorities. Next slide. So I'm just going to whip through the next 4 slides. We sort of briefly summarized what do we think that the broad creative, cultural and heritage sector can do that other kinds of public engagement can't. And one of the things is that some of the processes around climate change will take place over many years. But I think what the creative community can do brilliantly is compress time or make that more visual or bring those processes to life in a way that people can understand. The second slide is that essentially we need to engage beyond the usual suspects. There's been a lot of public meetings around the original national dialogue, and I think it was probably fair to say they often attract the usual suspects. We believe that a lot of the people on this call can engage the public beyond the usual suspects. Exploring different values and belief systems. You know, I don't think we want to pretend any of this is easy, and people are coming at this from different ways. So I think this and the next slide, which is about having conversations, having spaces in which people can explore what are the changes that we need to make and what does it mean for me, is something that I think the creative community can do brilliantly. So briefly, what is the fund? Well, obviously the focus is on engaging the public. And the reason I say that is that we have had some questions into us. I wish to green my venue. I wish to make my festival less, to reduce the carbon impact of my festival. Those things are indeed very important, very worthy, but I suppose they'd almost be considered hygiene issues now. For us, this is squarely, because we are partnering with the Department of Climate Action, this is squarely in the space of public engagement. The collaboration is going to be key for us. It's bringing together all the things you can see there on the screen. Some of you have asked, I'm an artist, I'd like to be matched to a local climate organisation. That's not something that government departments can do. So unfortunately, we can't match make for you. I think critical is how is this going to work? You'll know from the brief that we set you that there is a local authority call and a national call. Our hunch at the moment is that the local projects will come through the local authorities, and that the national call, which is open to climate organisations, creative, heritage and cultural organisations, will likely be about broader areas of impact as opposed to small local projects. Next slide. And I suppose before we head into the Q&A, this is a first for us. As far as we can tell, it's the first in the EU. We've had various other countries onto us. It is a combination of a creative brief and a climate brief. That might seem very obvious, but some of the projects to date have had at their heart, shall we say, an artistic impetus. But when we did our report and we asked those artists and those arts organisations, do you think it changed behaviours? What impact do you think it had on people? And often that can be an uncomfortable space for many people, because they say, well, I'm putting the work out there, I'm not assessing its impact. So I suppose we are challenging ourselves to move away from broad awareness raising. So projects to date have been fairly generic around climate change in our experience, and we're really trying to move towards behaviours that we think the public can change. So some of you on the call may say, well, the state should be doing this or business should be doing that, and those are perfectly valid views. But the particular focus on this fund is public behaviours that we can all change. And I think the brief hopefully makes that clear. Many of you on the call are from local authorities, and I think it won't come as a surprise to you, those of you who have worked with us before. We are always about networking the networks. So as well as the Creative Ireland coordinator in every local authority, is this an all of local authority application? Has the environment officer, the heritage officer, the climate action officer, are they all on board for this project? And then obviously, so there's the collaboration within the local authority and the collaboration outside to local groups. So we're really keen to see how you're able to bring those different threads together. And I think that is it, other than some of the practicalities. The closing date is the 21st of May. There are 2 strands. In both cases, we are not looking for multiple applications from each person. So for example, if you're a local authority, you will apply once with one project, unless you are applying in partnership with a number of local authorities, in which case you can make 2 applications. Ditto for the open call. We're not seeking people to send in multiple ideas. It's your best idea. And with that, as I say, we will have questions. And I say at the start, I'm sure all my colleagues who you will see eventually will also say, we may not have the answers to all your questions now. This is a first for us, or we may be able to give you a tentative answer, and we may need to go away and reflect, because no doubt you will raise things that we haven't yet thought of. And without further ado, I'll hand over.
Thanks, Tanya. And it's great to see so many people here today. Delighted that so many people are interested in this part of the Climate Action Fund and the dialogue. So I have responsibility for the National Dialogue on Climate Action, and my colleague Caroline is here today, and she'll take you through the Climate Action Fund. So next slide, please. Do I have control over the slides, or I do? Oh, what do I do? Colin, there, thank you. Thanks. So the National Dialogue is a forum for collaboration, and we are currently developing an endurance structure on this, and we want to hear the voice of everybody, communities, youth, all of the different voices, and the creative are a really, really important voice, and a voice that we need to hear and that we want to hear. So we are doing this, we're building these structures, we're going to use an evidence base, and we want the heart of it to be at local and community involvement. So next slide. Thanks. So just one of the first initiatives that we have kicked off under this endurance structure is our public consultation on the Climate Action Plan. And one of the parts of this, it launched on the 23rd of March, and it's open for 8 weeks. So we would really, really like everybody here on this call today, and all of your friends and family and anybody else that you know, if you could get people to log in on this and complete the questionnaire. It's very straightforward. It's done in a way that it's open to everybody to answer. It won't take much of your time, but it will be really, really useful for us in the information that we get back to allow us to feed into these endurance structures and to allow us to understand what's important to people, how, what are the issues that are important to you, and how we can feed those into our policies, into our climate action plan, into our endurance structures, and into our climate action fund. So we'll use these responses when we're designing and developing our future policies around climate action. So it's really important for people to get their voices in and to get heard and to do that. I think Colin might be able to put the link into the chat box maybe, so that people will have access to that. So that's an ask from me to you today. But also as part of the consultation, we've had a number of local conversations through the PPN networks, and we're gathering all of that information to find out what's important to people at local level, what barriers are in their way, how we can support them, what government can do more of, and we're collecting all of that information at the moment as well, and that will feed into our climate action plan. There's also a call for expert evidence that people who are a little bit more in tune to how we can get the emissions down from the 3.3% to the 7%. So that's also something that's available too. So this is all really part of our national dialogue, part of our consultation. And the creative is a very important aspect. As Tanya mentioned earlier, we worked together last year on the workshop, and the outcomes of that were really strong, which has led to this fund being established. I suppose one of the things that really struck home to me as part of that workshop was, we have all the stats, we have all the data, we have all the science, we send information out to people, and people are getting information bombarded all of the time. But really, I think what the creative space allows people to do is to maybe experience something. It gives them time to reflect, to think, to ponder, and come at it from a different perspective, come at it from a different angle. And I think that's the piece that this collaboration brings, and that the creative bring into this whole area of climate action. So I'm really hoping that we get to see some really, really good creative projects, and that we get to showcase them, and that it gets to make a difference in the area of climate change. And so thanks everybody for being here today. I'm going to just pass it on to my colleague Caroline, who'll just give a brief overview of the Climate Action Fund and this particular programme. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Justina. And part of the funding for the Creative Climate Action is going to come from the Climate Action Fund. So I'm just going to give a quick run through on what that is and what types of projects can normally be approved under the fund. So the Climate Action Fund was established on a statutory basis from the 1st of August 2020. It's going to be funded from surplus proceeds from the National Oil Reserve Agency levies. We're expecting to get in around 500 million into the fund out to 2027, and that will fund lots of different projects, big, small. We'll be rolling them out over the coming years out to that period. The legislation establishing the Climate Action Fund sets out the types of projects, research initiatives that can be funded. And these are the main ones, basically projects that kind of seek to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that increase the production or use of renewable energy, that seek to increase energy efficiency, and also projects that for areas that are impacted by the low carbon transition. So there is kind of a fairly broad remit on the types of projects and room there for creativity. Now we're also extending the types of projects that can be funded from the Climate Action Fund, and these were proposed in the new climate bill, which was published on the 23rd of March. And these relate to greenhouse gas removals, to climate resilience, and also for nature-based solutions that will assist in climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So next slide. So as part of sort of spending those substantial funds, we're in the process of developing a community climate action programme at the moment. And what we're aiming to do is to reach into all communities, large, small, rural, urban, and basically just to motivate people to act, to change behaviour, to come up with projects in their communities, and to kind of take ownership of them, and then that we will be providing funding for suitable projects. So as Justina said, the design of the full programme will be informed by the feedback through the public consultation that's going on at the moment, and the conversations going on with the public participation networks. When we get that back, we'll have an idea of where, well, hopefully, I mean, at the moment, I think there is very good feedback coming back in, but, you know, the more the better. So if anybody hasn't already participated, we'd really urge you to do so, because it will tell us where the financial support is needed, where capacity building is needed, and the types of projects that are being considered at a local level. So as part of the of this programme, and as an initial action, we're providing €1 million now for this Creative Climate Action Programme. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline and Justina. So just, there's a lot of questions coming in there in the Q&A, which is fantastic. I'm just typing back to some of you to say I'm taking note of all these questions, and they will be put to the speakers at the end. And all these slides will be made available, and the link is in there in the box as well. So I'll be responding back to each of you as we go through. So our next speaker, somebody asked, would the output of the climate conversation be available? Unfortunately, not in time for your response to this. So what we have is Simon, who's a director at EMCO as well, and who's an expert on sustainability in Ireland, who's going to go through some of the most highlight of the research of what we know about current attitudes and behaviours amongst the Irish public. So this might inform your decision and your areas of focus. So I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Colleen. I think everybody just got a preview of all the slides there. I was kind of randomly clicking through there. So just to say, it's obviously great just to see that there's the level of interest that's in this fund. It feels sometimes you spend quite a long time trying to make things happen, and then everything starts to happen at once. So it's really, really great to be here. I suppose just in one sense, maybe it's a bit of a cliche now, but obviously climate change is kind of one of the defining, issues of our time. We've obviously been in a very difficult situation with the global pandemic, but climate change hasn't gone away. And we kind of know that the choices and the decisions that we're making around, our policies, how we design our, transport infrastructure, how we design our towns, and how we design our villages, are going to really determine what life is going to be like in the next kind of 50 or 100 years. So we're really at a kind of a critical point in terms of thinking how we respond, to climate and to climate change. And I suppose I would just sort of say is like the kind of obviously been involved in the kind of area for quite a while. There's been peaks and troughs of interest in climate over the last couple of decades. But really where we're at now, I haven't seen the kind of level of depth and breadth of interest across public, across industry, across government in terms of trying to deal with the crisis of climate change. So we're really at an important, I suppose, an important juncture now. So see if I can get the slides to move. I don't think I can. So Marion, maybe I'll get you to go to the next slide. So as I sort of said, it's been an issue that's has been with us for quite a while, quite a number of decades. And it's going to be an issue that's kind of with us into the future, and we have to think about, how we creatively respond and adapt to climate. Some of this information that we wanted to talk about is actually in your brief, but we just wanted to give you a sense of some of the kind of the public attitudes and public interests around climate and climate change. And sometimes it's presented in the media in a particular way, but actually when you go out to communities and when you speak to people and do surveys, you get a slightly different perspective on what the public are actually thinking about climate. And I suppose at a very high level, we would sort of say, from looking at all the different bits of research that are coming in from academics, from the European Commission, from polling authorities, from particular media groups, is that the Irish public, they get and they understand the seriousness of climate change. We're kind of a little bit not that we're totally past, but we're a little bit past it trying to explain what it is. So the public get it, they understand it, they see it as a serious problem. They also sort of see support for government action and business action around climate. But, you know, it's important that whatever action is taken by government, that it's fair. You know, that it's not, disproportionately impacting one section of society in terms of rural communities or other communities. So if action is fair, you know, public will support it. It's also, it's effective, you know, so there's a high level of interest, anxiety and concern. So the public want to see government action actually work. So it needs to be, so it needs to happen. And again, we can also sort of see from the the various bits of research that actually, you know, the public want to take action. You know, they've, as I said, they've gone beyond saying, you know, is it an important issue or not? What do we do about it? But actually, what we're finding is that, you know, the public are still constrained by, you know, access to information, or they're constrained by the infrastructure that they live within, or they're, you know, they're constrained by the agency that they have, that they feel that they can do something, and also they're constrained by finance. You know, so if they want to make some big measures around retrofitting their home, we have to be very clear that there are financial constraints. And I suppose what's interesting from, I suppose, just looking at the research over the last number of years is, particularly in some areas around levels of concern, is that it's been increasing over time. You know, so there's a real urgency for government and for all sections of society to act and respond to that growing level of concern. There's kind of specific things that are, I suppose, relevant to Ireland, and sometimes it's portrayed in the media as that climate is is this battle between the kind of urban and rural, and really we don't see that in a lot of the information that's coming through. You know, between the kind of levels of concern about the issue, you know, would be balanced generally between kind of urban and rural communities, but actually where the points of difference are usually around what should be done about it and what kind of measures should we put in place. But I think it's really important in looking at this kind of information is we need to be finding those points of commonality rather than the usual points of difference and how we target messaging to different groups. We need to understand what connects people in both rural and urban communities, and work with that and show the shared interest. So Marion, can you go to the next slide? So just in terms of coming to, I suppose, to the brass tacks of climate change is, you know, the challenge ahead of us is actually how we reduce our emissions. You know, that's what we're kind of now legally bound to be doing. And really, I think only as a society, even though we've been talking about it for decades, we're only really kind of getting to grips with what that future might actually look like. You know, the scale of emission reductions that need to happen, and how it's going to affect how we live and how our towns and our villages look and how we get around, and our food and our diet and all these kind of issues. We're only really starting to get to grips with it, but the scale of change is actually quite significant. So, you know, the UN produces a really good report every year around the emissions gap, and they've been saying, you know, to kind of achieve the science-based targets that we need to achieve to limit warming of the planet, we need to look at a global carbon footprint of people emitting, you know, 2 to 2.5 tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And what we see when we look at that, you know, there's obviously, it highlights some of the disparity and the inequality globally around climate in terms of the causes of climate change and the impacts of climate change. And that actually, it's the wealthier and the materially wealthy countries that are disproportionately emitting higher levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and they need to do more to reduce their emissions. And so it's just really just trying to get people to get to grips and understand that kind of scale and what our towns and our cities are going to look like in the future. So from a behavioral point of view, the word behavior change, as you mentioned a few times, and something that I've sort of said, you know, multiple times over the years, is that climate change is one of those issues that is very difficult from a behavior change point of view for various reasons. There's 3 things that I always sort of say we need to think about, and how we kind of frame how we think about behavior change and climate, and that we need to overcome. That the issue is diffuse, you know, so it seems to be about everything and everything, and so sometimes those that want to act, you know, they don't know where to start, or they don't have a good idea of the level of impact of any actions that they do take. It's very unlike other, you know, say public health measures where we have a single, I'd say anti-smoking, where we have a single issue and a single endpoint. Climate really kind of touches on everything, and we need to kind of concretize and make that more understandable to people. Another kind of challenge around behavior is that it's distant. It's often, the last 20 years we've been showing pictures of melting icebergs, and so for people the challenge or the vulnerabilities or the risks from climate change are very far away, and they weren't on their doorstep. And we know that that's not true anymore, and that we're seeing big impacts in terms of coastal erosion and flooding and other issues, and we're having to adapt, and we're having to make those kind of changes more meaningful and visible to people. And obviously, from a behaviour point of view, another problem has been that it's been delayed. It's always been seen as an issue that's kind of far off in the future, and how we frame those issues. We need to make it more immediate and more salient, and more relevant to people. So we need to kind of overcome those kind of behavioural barriers, I suppose, from a climate point of view, and the creative sector is probably the best place to do that. I think within a lot of the discussion, this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, is that a lot of the policy is about emission reduction. It is about technology. It is about the language that we use is quite technocratic, and we think in terms of kind of kilowatt hours and tons of CO2 emissions. But actually, the public in general don't really care about energy. They don't care about what energy is. They care about what energy allows them to do, whether that's cooking food, whether it's staying warm, whether it's traveling and kind of getting around. And so we need to connect to people on that kind of level rather than the technical side. So then the last point, just as a kind of again, it's another hobby horse, but quite often how behavior change is framed at a government level is that people are the problem. And they're not behaving in a particular way because they don't have enough information or they don't understand. Whereas actually we see that that's probably not the case, and actually behavior change should be, how do we make it easier and how do we make it possible for people to make the changes and the behavior changes that they're telling us that they want to do. And again, the creative sector, design, architecture, the best place to make this happen. So yeah. Sorry,
I'm doing the cut-off moment.
Simon,
that's great. Simon is so passionate about this. He could talk about it, and is an absolute font of information. So some people did ask there in the chat, where can they get more information about climate change and the type of issues. So what Simon, all the slides will be available at the end. There's a recording of this, but also on the submittable, there's some information about climate change, and we can direct you, about attitudes and behaviour, we can direct you to that. Please keep on popping your questions in the Q&A. I'm keeping a note of those. If you can indicate any person that you particularly like to direct them to, please do. So I'm delighted now to introduce a person who's very close to this and who's going to give us some great lessons learned from Creative Climate project. So this is from Julie's Bicycle is the name of her organisation, and she is the director. It's Alison Ticknell. So I'll allow her explain her own context. Thanks, Alison.
Hi, hello, thanks everybody so much for having me, and I'm afraid my slides have moved ahead of me. I'm sure it's the computer secretly making sure I land on time, but thanks so much for having me. And I just first of all like to sort of say this is an amazing project. It actually uses the same bylines as ours, so I feel that there's some real sympathetic thinking going on. So Creative Climate Action is indeed, as Tanya has pointed out, as far as I know, the largest commissioning fund of its kind, not just in the EU, but anywhere in the world. And of course, it goes to the heart of action, bringing together the stewards of communities, our local authorities with the souls of communities, our artists, our creatives who connect, who animate and filter our lives in relationship to the world. And of course, it brings all those opportunities for the unusual suspects. I love that idea. So we have the content, we have the gathering of large communities, and we have these new voices. So I'm going to state the obvious. We really do know that culture can change the world, and that's why it's so important to locate it at the heart of global challenges. So just a little bit about Julie's Bicycle, my company. We were founded in 2007, so we've been around for quite a long time, really exploring the nuts and bolts of cultural practice and to understand what it takes to fundamentally rethink this. And now I think partly because the cultural community is confident and climate literate, we're seeing an explosion of creative activities. Let me just do something about that. Sorry. Those were you don't need to know my objectives. And I was asked to talk a little bit about some inspiration from the field. So I thought I'd use the key themes that the Climate Action Fund is looking at. And start with home. And I thought I'd start with a creative climate leader, somebody who we've worked with, Philip Kusasa, who joined our Creative Climate Leadership Programme in 2018 in order to really focus on big picture change within his own community in Zimbabwe. His home is his local forest where he lives in Ndau. He's a local festival organizer. And Philip realized that with every tree that was felled, a piece of his living heritage fell with it. The stories, the spirits, the language, literally rooted in the trees. So through conversation, through collaboration, he created a living museum, his home. And in spite of setbacks caused by cyclones and other extreme weather events, this project has really caught the imagination and attention of national arts councils and other arts projects, and has become a model for conserving through celebration, conversation, and through the arts. It's a really exciting project. The second theme, this is another project I won't go into, but the second theme I thought I'd look at was food and water. So food and water, obviously hugely important and endlessly interesting. Food is so similar to art. It's inventing, preparing, playing, displaying, inviting, and it's a sensuous experience of community and conversation. And this super piece of work by Kitchen Cultures, an artist, Kaji Modi, it explores the knowledge of migrant women of colour in the kitchen to develop new recipes and preserve and transform food in order to reduce food waste through the exploration of different cultures and different ways of coming together. Again, this project is scaled and it can happen everywhere, all over the world, just stimulating those conversations as well as tackling food waste. Digitizing has brought all sorts of new opportunities for this, including poetry, videos, poems, which brings me on to Arts Catalyst. I don't know how many people know about Arts Catalyst, but it explores climate impacts on local communities. It's very directly about action, but again, it's very much working alongside artists, social scientists, and environmental experts to really create legacy. One example, which is very like Kitchen Cultures, brings together an inquiry into water governance and its impact on well-being. It's led very much by the local community trying to understand what resilience means in the Yorkshire Calder Valley. This climate governance framework is being adopted again by the local authority for wide-scale application. And finally, in this section, I thought I'd have to mention knotweed. Sorry, I'll talk about that in a bit. Sorry. So travel is a really key part of course of this whole issue, and I think a lot of people are talking about travel at the moment in the context of the digital opportunities that we've got, such as getting rid of most business travel, and this is very widespread, but also travel touring, and the European Jazz Network is now regularly touring its performances by train. But I just thought I'd mention the Handlebars, who actually only tour by bike across the UK. And then there's shopping and recycling very quickly. This is really, I wanted to highlight a project that's part of our Season for Change. It's about recycling, reuse and reimagining within the Roma community. It's led by an artist who is re-engaging the Roma community through recycling workshops, but also talking about how her community is navigating what has been a very besieged experience, hearing about the voices of their experience through an exploration of climate and what it means to them. It's a really important project. The Trash Academy is a very similar project that's going on in Philadelphia. It takes the idea of implosion, which is a design principle, working with young people to understand the story of their lives and their histories through objects that are affecting them. This was about toilet paper, and this implosion was developed at the beginning of the COVID crisis, because there was such a shortage of toilet paper that they were able to get hold of. Looking at the story of toilet paper and really rooting that again in their community, understanding why they are affected so badly by trash, why it happens to them, is an incredibly important context for climate justice. So again, a hugely wide application which deals with climate impacts, as well as allows these voices, these stories, to actually breathe life into the issue. Sorry. The final one is local environment. And of course, this is something that everybody feels most strongly. Muscle Choir, you probably all know, it appeared at the Venice Biennale, and is really about the songs of mussels as they sing, whether they sing by clicking fast and furiously, which means that the water that they filter is healthy, or if they are sluggish, slow, feeble. And it tells you both about the animating of nature, but also about local community. And this has had, again, a very wide application now. It's been a bit of a sensation in terms of conservation, communicating, and also actually tackling environment at the same time. This last project is a group of young people, which was an initial slide, which they developed a piece called Fog Everywhere, which prompted the convergence of climate action within the local authority around tackling pollution as a result of this beautiful piece by young people. A similar piece of work has been done by somebody called Love Sega. So how do we scale this? Very briefly, we're doing something called Season for Change. It's a UK-wide programme animating a community right across the country to celebrate our environment, really look at climate justice through small-scale, local justice-led programmes, as well as larger commissions. And finally, I just wanted to identify that Music Declares Emergency, which is a very new initiative, is galvanizing the music industry right across the world. And I think that this is where we're seeing this incredible maturing of a movement of change, which we call the Creative Climate Movement. The question is how we scale. The things that we've learned is that culture is an ecosystem. If we get the context right, the creative content of the storytelling will thrive in those flourishing environments. We do need to focus on the big ones. Somebody mentioned biodiversity earlier on, net zero, nature, zero waste and regeneration. We also need to put justice at the heart of a lot of our work. Evidence and data include the stories we tell. They're as invaluable as the metrics. We need to invite, we need to share, and we need to include. We must start collaborating better. It's difficult to collaborate, but collaboration, I think, is probably one of our biggest invitations, and it's our biggest challenge. We need to look for and champion leadership wherever it is, and very often it's rooted in places rather than in voices. And we need to advocate everywhere that culture drives climate action. Culture really does need to be at the heart of action at all levels. And again, this is what's so exciting about this project, because it's bringing together these two big departments. Finally, we need to celebrate the new cultural ecology and feel our way into it, because everything matters. And we're at such an important moment. My belief, I think we all share, is that we change culture and we change the world. Thank you.
Mute. We're still doing it. Thank you. That was wonderful, Alison. I love the idea of conversation and celebration. I think that was a lovely note to start on. And I think that you've given people such a great breadth of examples, which people might want to go and look at. So I'm going to open up. We've had different questions through, which I'm going to try and group and point towards different panelists. Also joining the panel, who haven't spoken so far, is Dr. Ben Twist, who's the Director of Creative Carbon Scotland. He again would be very involved in commissioning creative climate projects. He'd be great at sort of some of the questions that came up about what is a creative climate. There's quite a few questions there about what is a creative climate project. And also we are joined by Kate Delaney, who's an assistant principal and who will be very close to the day-to-day technical questions that quite a few of you have asked as well. So just before we kick off, I'm going to group the questions. There's kind of I think the questions that came up while we have Alison and Ben with us, I think it's really important around some of the what is a creative climate project that came up. So I might just read these out, the questions that came up, and look at it as well. So one of the questions there was, the first question was to the panel, would an artist-led education programme for art professionals across the Irish creative sector be welcomed, particularly as climate and ecological insights are complex and challenge conventions of creative practice and are not widely? So that's the first question around the type of projects. The second question, and I think this relates to what you just mentioned, Alison, so I might direct this to you. Will creative engaging ways to communicate the evidence base and inform citizens on how they can take climate action using digital platforms qualify for funding? So I know you can't say whether it would qualify for funding, but I think it might be interesting to sort of show how that is relevant. And then another question came out, and this is about what is climate when we're talking about the creative climate. And the call for climate is just one symptom of the ecological emergency. The messaging should be broader towards biodiversity collapse, warming seas, pollution. And framing should be for transformative learning, integrated eco-social values, intergenerational planetary well-being. So climate is too abstract for the general public as well, which I think is a really good point. We're calling it climate, but I think it's up to the people who come back to us with ways to engage the public with that. So I might just ask Alison and Ben just to talk about their experience of what has really worked in a creative climate context. I might start with you, Alison. Sorry, I'm calling you Julie. Alison, sorry.
That's all right. Well, not the first. So lots and lots of really interesting questions there. I think we all understand that climate, it can be a problematic word, but it's also we need to look at it very generously. That what really works is this opportunity to really breathe into what are very complex issues. My feeling now, after being in this space for such a long time, is that actually all of it matters, that this is so multidimensional, it's so rich, it's carries so many themes to it that and there are as many ways to talk about this and feel our way into this as there are people and practitioners. So that's why the fund, I think, needs to be very generous. I think we can use climate as a shortcut to a whole bunch of intersectional and deeply interconnected issues that fundamentally are about this incredible invitation we have to rethink who we are in relation to. And the point about the data and digital space is that, of course, because climate change is too often expressed as technocratic or political or a deficit model or as something that is going to be too hard and too big and too complicated, of course the arts and culture tell us so much more about this, and representing some of these issues in all the ways that they need to be represented is absolutely crucial.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Alison. And Ben, building on that point, but also another question that I know you've an expertise in is how do we know how effective projects are? And based on your experience, what's a good way of measuring it? Somebody raised the point there about looking at, does the submission assessment include a life cycle analysis of the proposed projects across bio, psycho, social and economic aspects? So flipping that a little bit, what have you seen as being really effective ways in a tender to show the impact that your project would have and your target audience?
Just a couple of things. I need to I'll put a link in the chat in a minute about a thing, a Library of Creative Sustainability, which is on our website at Creative Carbon Scotland, that has a series of projects. But just to go back to answer that question particularly, I think the thing that interests me for this particular fund and interests me generally is how we create agency. we've talked a bit about behavior change, but behavior change is quite difficult unless individuals particularly have agency. And I would like to see from this fund projects that create agency and widen collaboration between communities, larger organizations, and what have you. And I think the things that we have been successful in, and where we've seen success in Scotland, is where, and indeed in some European projects that we're doing, is where that the understanding of the complexity of the challenge and the enabling people to take part in some real way, and that is often about collaboration. And so I think the sort of things that I would be most interested in to see are those projects that connect a number of partners up. And we've seen it in the questions and the chat. You know, is it possible to be one partner running one organization, one person running this project? And I think I would very much encourage the collaboration between organizations of different sorts. And we've seen that, I think, particularly in the call out to local authorities, where we're seeking wide engagement across the local authorities, but also those projects that involve people who don't perhaps normally sit down together, the climate people, the culture people, and others indeed, communities and what have you, that are maybe not at the moment talking to each other. And I think I want to just touch upon the importance of change here. I think is really key. It's quite easy in many respects to do a project that raises awareness or whatever, but actually if it doesn't bring about the change that the fund is looking for, then I think it's not really going to be the sort of thing that certainly that interests me. I think, as Alison and others have pointed out, we need now significant change to happen very fast. And so I think what I would be looking for in these projects and this fund is something that really can demonstrate how change is going to happen, not just awareness raising or information.
Great. And there was a question, I might direct this to Tanya. There was a question there, I think it came up from maybe Simon's comments or possibly yours. Who are the usual suspects? Because some people who are less familiar with this might be. So to Ben's point, like if we're moving past awareness and into the start of
yes, that's one of the questions, Colleen. I suppose one of the things is we see a hell of a lot of projects around children and young people, and all the publicly available research in Ireland shows that young people are the most sensitized to the challenge, the ones least in need of persuasion. There's also research showing that the wealthiest people in society have the highest carbon footprint. So I suppose what we're saying is, and I think it's on page 6 of the brief, we have said that projects that are exclusively aimed at children are not really for us and for this fund. If they are aimed at a broader audience, including children, that's fine. But I think between green schools, initiatives in the Department of Education, other initiatives that our colleagues in the Department of Climate Action are doing, there is a heck of a lot of work already targeted at children. So I suppose, Colleen, when we say the usual suspects, one of the things we're keen to see is not more projects just aimed at young people. Okay. Obviously, it's no secret that the government has described some of the audiences that are either fearful of some of the impacts. That could include the agricultural community. People who are less wealthy are obviously very worried about increase in their energy bills. What's this going to cost us? So I suppose what we're interested in is to understand from you, if you have a particular target audience in mind, that would be of particular interest, as opposed to, Yira, it's for the entire general public and we'll see how it goes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and then I might just point this question to Kate. It was just this question that's come up a few times about collaboration. So the fund has to be done collaboratively. And I suppose there's a few different questions about what the collaborations can be. So one of the questions is the local projects only available to, only possible through the local authorities? Can you collaborate with people outside of the state? Can you collaborate with third level institutions? Can you submit by yourself? You probably, I know, Kate, you've been reading all those questions, but I just think in that space of the submissions, could you maybe just elaborate for that for people, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, there's two strands, and it is important that you start your application with the correct strand. Strand 2 is specific to local authorities, so it would have to be a local authority making that application. That can be on behalf of the local authority in of itself, or in collaboration with other local authorities or their external partners, but the local authority would have to be the lead applicant. The open call is welcome for you know, across kind of all sorts of organizations, collectives, creatives, and they may local, if you're targeting a local community, or you know, your target audience is a community, it does not have to go through the local authority application process. We are looking for kind of scalable projects. We do want, you know, representation of like a national reach, but if you have a specific target audience in mind, as long as you're clear on that, you are welcome to apply for Strand 1. And again, it's just we're open to all sorts of organizations. Collaboration is very important. It is in our assessment criteria, the level of collaboration. If you're one organization in and of yourself, you have a great idea, you have the people within the organization that can pull it together and scale and demonstrate impact, then that's fine. That one organization could apply. It's just that the level of collaboration will be considered in terms of the assessment.
Great. Thank you. And then there's a question, I might direct this to Caroline, or you can bounce it back to Tanya, I'm not sure which it is. The question is do projects have to have matching funding? Was a question that a couple of people have asked. Tanya's actually answering it with her head and no words, which is very creative. So Tanya, I don't know who wants to answer that in more detail.
No match funding is necessary. It's welcome if you have it, you don't need it.
Great. There was another question from a person in Limerick that was sort of saying that arts organisations might need sort of supporting, you know, it's very difficult given their capacity, things like insurance, building costs, that type of thing. Is that allowable under the, you know, or is a portion of that allowable under the fund?
I suppose we would need to go away and reflect on that. A proportion of your admin costs could be assigned to this project, but this project is not a grant to cover your insurance costs or the rental of your building. As we said at the start, this is about public engagement, but obviously there will be a proportion of your overall sort of overheads that can be charged to the project if that can be clearly explained in the proposal.
Another question that was more about how the fund, somebody has a project that won't be ready until next year. Can they apply for this year? Is there a time frame in which the project has to be delivered that they're applying for?
Again, we don't necessarily have a full answer to that. We've been asked that we can certainly, some people are saying, look, this is a 2-year project and we're going to start with some research, or we're really going to need a bit of time to get all the partners together. If the entire project is happening next year, hold off and apply again. If there are some parts of the project that will happen this year, but its big moment of public engagement happens next year, you can apply.
Another person asked a question about will performance spaces or performance channels be made available for projects? Or should that be part of, I think that was obviously something that was a physical performance, but they just wanted to know, or it could have been for an artistic endeavour, will a space be made available to show them?
No, I mean, the idea is public engagement. So you're doing the public engagement, you're finding the venue, you're finding the space. We have a section on our website if people care to go to it, which is around creativity and climate change. And we certainly gather the projects, and we will be doing our absolute utmost to highlight them across social media, in the media. But ultimately, it is up to you to find that platform for public engagement. Our support would be more in the form of a backup.
And can I say something about that? Actually, there's an opportunity there, isn't there, to bring in different partners and different collaborators who might not be the usual suspects. So I think there's a real real challenge goes out then to, if you don't have your space or you don't have whatever, go and find one that perhaps isn't the normal one, or is a normal one that isn't currently engaging in this work. So I think there's a real opportunity to bring different people into the project there.
There's a question there about what scale does a countrywide project fit into? Could it be put forward in Strand 1, or does it need to be both with the local authority in Strand 2? And another person had sort of said, what's local versus national? So just to kind of understand it.
So if you have a national project, I hope I haven't misunderstood, then you would be applying under Strand 1. If you have a local project, you can apply separately, but I would urge you to talk to your local authority. We wouldn't want to be getting in very similar projects, one from the local authority under Strand 2 and one from a local organisation under Strand 1. The Creative Ireland coordinator for your local area is listed under Creative Communities with their email address on our website. So if you are a local group, it doesn't preclude you applying for a local project, but I guess in our heads, we understood that the local projects would be brought together, and I guess the best of the best would be put forward by the local authority, but it doesn't preclude local organisations applying under Strand 1. But we would need to see evidence that they had at least checked with their local authority that they weren't doubling up.
Okay. Can I add something there again? There is that opportunity to bring in a non-usual suspect. But I think there's something valuable here to touch upon. And Alison, I don't know whether you'd agree, but my experience, our experience in Scotland is that really successful projects take some time. And the scale of this is, they're big projects and they take quite a lot of setting up. And I would be nervous about somebody that was trying to do something very large very quickly. And actually, I would sort of consider what is achievable, but also how much time you have to build up the energy, the contacts, the collaborations, and so on to really make this work. It may be something you've worked on already, but do give it time. And so that has an impact, I think, on the scale that you might be thinking about.
And to pick up on Ben's point, if you've prototyped something, if you've done something at a local level already that you feel has wider applicability, we're interested in hearing about that. And as Ben also indicated, we're not envisaging a lot of small funded projects. We're interested in funding a few projects of scale and ambition.
Can I just also, I just completely agree with both. And the best projects, I think, are also the projects that through the developmental process are really looking out hard at what it is that you are seeking to achieve, and that you actually have, although they can be flexible and they can change, you've got some really clear metrics about how you are going to evidence what you're achieving so that you can scale it and take it much broader. That's where the Music Declares programme has come from, and that's why it can scale so widely. It's very simple, but it really now is making a difference. So yeah, I completely agree.
And I think there's some material in the evaluation section of the application guidance that helps talk about that, who you need to inform about this, and how you can then take the evidence on to maybe make the next project or whatever it may be, or somebody else can make the next project.
Yeah, and knowing who you're going to be speaking to with that evidence as well. These, who exactly are you targeting and where it needs to go? Those are the ones that are successful, definitely.
There's a couple of questions about whether it's going to run again next year, and I suppose the easiest answer to that is we do not know. Government departments are funded on an annual basis. Our colleagues in the Department of Climate Action have very generously put forward 1 million over 2 years. And we have managed to get funding for this year, and we will ring fence funding for next year. So that's just to say, all going well, we would need to evaluate the impact of those projects. And if, as we assume it will be hugely successful, then we would seek to go again. But that is not a promise, that is an aspiration at this stage.
I'm just going to come back. There was also a couple of questions there from organisations who are currently working with young people. So I think the question there was, it's less about, is it about awareness in young people, but is it about kind of helping young people to actually be agents of change? That projects like that would be, well, not saying whether they would or wouldn't be, but would projects like that be considered? Like this isn't, I don't know, I suppose the question is there is like people are already working
I suppose I
people.
refer to my earlier answer. Youth only focused projects, there are so many of them already. Already funded through the Department of Education, the Department of Children, other initiatives, that we feel that what we're trying to do is shift the focus somewhat. If those projects are young people and other cohorts, yes. If it's an exclusively youth-funded project, no. And that is clear in the brief.
Okay. And then there were questions. I just wanted to come back to, there was a very specific question. How does this fit in with other projects such as CLAR? Are you looking towards kind of building into, and the other question is, are there any specific targets that projects have to meet in terms of their impact set? In terms of impact on climate attitudes or behaviours?
Well, I suppose those are tough questions. I mean, we would imagine in your proposal, you will be talking about, as Ben said, we've tried to help you with the evaluation of impact, because this is, I think we need to be frank, this is a new area for all of us. How are we going to evaluate behavior change? So that's why we've tried to help you to sort of prompt some of the questions you might be asking yourself around impact. I don't know if that answers the question, Colleen.
Okay. Then there was another question in terms of who should be the lead in a collaboration. Is there a preference that the NGO be the lead or that the artist be the lead? Is there a decision on there?
Either is possible, but obviously the lead partner would be the one with whom we would be, you know, entering into the financial arrangements. It would be the person who would be doing the final report. So we envisage that that is more likely with the local authority, that's a given, but with the national strand, that it is more likely to be an organisation. It's not to preclude individual artists, but to come back to, this is about public engagement. An individual artist, unless they're, you know, and we remain to be persuaded, has that capacity and all the resources to handle such a project on their own, we would envisage you partnering with an organisation that can help you with that.
So that probably answers, there's another question there, which is if your project just doesn't need collaboration other than a platform to bring it directly to the public, would that work? Or do you feel that the engagement has to be deeper?
Sorry, Colleen, I didn't quite get that.
The question was there, my project doesn't need collaboration other than a platform to bring directly to public. Does that put them at a disadvantage?
I suppose it does, because ultimately you need to have that platform. This isn't something that the department can provide the platform to you. So you would need to have considered what is the platform for that public engagement.
Okay. I think that's largely, there was sorry. I think a lot of these have been answered already.
While you're looking, can I just say,
Sure.
in answer to that last one, again, I say, take this opportunity to find a really interesting and different collaborator to work with. So if you've all you need is somebody to somewhere to a platform for your project, maybe there's a really interesting researcher who's working on evaluation that you could talk to bring into your project to really look at the impact and learn from there. So take the opportunity to find a new partner that you've never met before. It's a sort of speed dating thing, to go out and find somebody different and to bring them into the project, and preferably somebody perhaps who isn't currently working on climate change and culture. So somebody who you can bring into the fold.
Right, which I kind of think then answers, there was another question there about if there's already a research project happening, how could that be kind of brought into this context? So I presume in that case, it's about finding a creative partner who could bring your research alive, I presume.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or something to that effect. I think you answered it, Kate. Apologies, I'm trying to read the things and check. But people working outside the Republic of Ireland, are they allowed? Did you answer that? Sorry.
Yeah, so what we were saying was that the lead applicant would have to be based in the Republic of Ireland. However, we welcome partners on projects. Partners may be based outside of the Republic of Ireland, so they may engage with external partners.
Okay, so just to wrap it up, we've gone a little bit over the time. I think it'd be just worth to ask Justina and Caroline, just from your point of view, because you're kind of one of the funders of it as well as Creative Ireland, is there anything particularly that you really feel you would like to sort of see, or you'd be excited to sort of see being addressed through this fund? Sorry to put you on the spot, Justina. And maybe just like in terms of what we've been going through with the climate conversations, I suppose that's kind of giving you some information.
Well, maybe while Justina's thinking, I think, and it has been raised, there is a lot of awareness already out there. And I think a key ask of this is that the projects will lead to action. And I think that's the main thing that we're looking for, and we'll just engage people and animate people, empower people to act. So that's basically what we're looking for.
It's fairly clear.
Can I really emphasize the empower bit there? I think that's really important. Engaging only gets us so far. We need to empower them.
Yeah, no, and we've gone beyond. The whole focus of the new dialogue is on leading people to action and you know, providing the supports that people can take action, whether that's monetary or whether that's capacity building. And you know, that's another part probably of the Climate Action Fund that might come out later as well, is just that there will be supports there for capacity building, you know, where it's needed across local authorities and across communities and different groups. So, but that might be a little bit further down the line. But definitely, I think the one thing is if people get onto the Climate Action Plan consultation and get your views in there, because the more responses we get through there with people's views on it, the more then when we go to take decisions for in the future, we'll have that information to hand. So that'll help us direct future funding or future supports or future events, you know, in a specific way. So I just would encourage everybody again to get on and give their views there and to circulate it again, because we want to get beyond the usual suspects. So everybody, we want to hear from everybody, and everybody's kind of.
Can I just make one point which relates to that this area of what you're going to consider significant action is, you know, it's huge and it's a really new area, as Tanya's pointed out. One of the things I think that we can do, and it's come up a couple of times in the questions, and is about bearing witness to the movement. So what's happening is there is a huge amount of new concern from pretty much everywhere that we look, but it is not yet speaking in the way that it needs to speak to power. It's not creating those really big political and economic shifts that we need in order to really tackle this at scale and speed. And of course, there's the COP26 talks happening at the end of the year and onwards. So one of the key questions that's come up a few times is, where is this going to go? And I think it's a really, really important question. Bearing witness, making visible, advocating and making a noise is such an important thing for political power.
Great. That's a great point, Alison. And sorry, there was a question there about what level of it's a good question, what level of formal community mandate is necessary for the relevant strand one? How much can be autonomous, sui generis, from accredited creative professionals engaging with communities, as long as they address? So that's just the question of, does there need to be a formal community mandate?
No, I mean, a creative organisation can apply, but I think, Kate, you may have mentioned, we would urge you to have a look at the application form early, not just on the day you're uploading it. And the brief talks about the criteria for evaluation. So you needn't have a partner, although ideally you would, with a local community group for a project, but you would need to demonstrate in your application either a track record of having worked with community groups on other topics, or how you were going to identify that, because clearly, as I keep coming back to it, it's the public engagement piece as much as it's the creative piece. So we would just need to understand, how does that organisation, which has no community or local group on board, what's the plan of action to engage people?
Can I just ask, if I have a moment, do you include communities, not local, not geographical communities, but communities of interest and communities of practice? We have an organisation in Scotland, the Glasgow Women's Library, that deals with women, works with women across the whole of Scotland. So it's not local, but it has a very strong community focus, if you like. Does that, does that make sense?
Yeah, and yes, that's possible. Yeah.
And I think that idea, I think it's really interesting what Alison just mentioned. Like, we talked in the workshop that we did on the report, on the Creative Climate Report, about making the challenge visible, but we haven't really talked about making the response visible. So I think that's really interesting, because it is quite invisible, the response. And it's only because we're working on the climate conversations that we're actually starting to make that visible. So I think that to see that happen creatively as well would be very interesting as well. So I think we will endeavour, MCO and Kate will endeavour to answer all the questions that were listed individually. We have to kind of wrap it up here now. The person who asked for Dr. Simon O'Rafferty to be on their team, no, he's on our team and we need him. So, but we will make any of our resources available, and please do get in touch. And there is a lot of information and research available, and Simon is a one-man library. So you can get in touch.
I would also say, Colleen, that you can pick Simon's brain virtually, in the sense that, you know, Kate, Simon, all of us went to some trouble in Appendix 2 to gather loads of brilliant international resources, because we all are aware this is new in Ireland. This is a new fund, the first of its kind. Please, please check out Appendix 2 of the brief on our website. There's just plenty of resources of other places that, shall we say, are a little bit ahead of us, and there's lots of stuff online.
So, and I know I'm doing a shameless plug once again for the climate conversation, but actually, as you go through it, you learn lots of things as well. So please do it if you get a chance. And we're really excited. This is just a wonderful response today. Thank you to everybody who could join us. And we will get back to anybody's questions that we have listed there. We'll try and get back to you as well. Thank you very much, guys.